The longer they wait, the worse it gets for them. So this is the window if you're going to do it, which is why I'm so concerned about it.
Tension in the South China Sea has been building to new highs, but the region seems to have slipped out of the headlines. Some experts believe this situation parallels the early stages of another ongoing military conflict, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. One of these experts is Dmitry Alperovich, founder of the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike. Today, we're going to discuss the importance of Taiwan strategically and economically, and the devastating consequences a direct conflict between the US and China would have on the global economy. Dmitry writes about all of this in his new book, World on the Brink: How America Can Beat China in the Race for the 21st Century. Before we start, please remember to leave a comment and subscribe to our channel. My name is Ed D'Agostino from Malden Economics. Welcome to Global Macro Update. Dmitry, you and I are talking shortly after an assassination attempt on former President Trump. Our news headlines are going to be dominated even more by politics than they have been up until now. South China Sea and the conflict between the US and China, it's fallen out of the news cycle. Why is this so important in your mind?
Well, as I write in the book, I think this conflict is quite likely to happen in the next 4 to 8 years. And this conflict would leave no one untouched in every corner of the world. Of course, the importance of China to the world economy, everyone is well aware. And a conflict over Taiwan that very likely is to draw the United States in would be absolutely devastating, would immediately cause a global depression. There are some estimates it would cause about $10 trillion, about 10% of global GDP to be wiped out in the first year. Not to mention, of course, the potential for nuclear escalation if the United States is fighting China. Both are nuclear powers. The potential for absolute devastation in the region and enormous losses of life that the United States military hasn't experienced on a daily basis since World War II. This is very, very serious, and we need to do everything in our power to avert this potential conflict.
In the book, World on the Brink, one of the things that you do really well is you walk us through the history of this region. There was a lot that I sort of knew, but it was great to be reminded, and I think a lot of people feel that way. Like there's so much regional history in that area. The U.S. currently has a one China policy. Was Taiwan a part of China at one time?
No, and just to explain one China policy, because a lot of people who are not steeped into the nuances of U.S. policies vis-a-vis the Taiwan Strait, may not appreciate it, that one China policy does not mean that the U.S. actually believes in one China, despite what the name of the policy is. It is a policy of ambiguity. It was created by Kissinger and Nixon in the 1970s and then reaffirmed by presidents ever since, that the United States acknowledges, does not accept, but acknowledges that people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait believe there is one China. But the essential policy of the United States is that if there were peaceful unification between Taiwan and the mainland, we would accept it, but we would not accept and we oppose forceful unification with China, i.e. an invasion of from the mainland of the island of Taiwan. And as I write in the book, the history of Taiwan is really, really interesting and is very distinct from the history of China itself. In fact, there was not ever in the entire history of Taiwan one single moment when whoever fully controls China fully controlled Taiwan. Taiwan was host of numerous invasions and attempts at colonizations by the Europeans, the Han Chinese, the Japanese, and it was only actually the Japanese in the 1890s that managed to establish full control of this island and pacify the resistance from the indigenous tribes, who are, by the way, not Han Chinese, but Austronesians. Of course, the Japanese controlled that island through World War II, and only at the end of World War II was the island formally given to Chiang Kai-shek, who at the time already was not fully in control of China. He was fighting a civil war with Mao and his communists, and was steadily losing that civil war until he ultimately fled over the Taiwan Strait to Taiwan and established a fairly brutal dictatorial regime there that ultimately disintegrated, and a democracy was established on the island in the 1990s.
For the person who's sitting at home saying, well, okay, it's obvious to me that the U.S. and China having direct conflict could be terrible. We should avoid that. Can you go deeper into why Taiwan really should matter to the average American? Because I don't think it's that obvious. Cuba is not a part of the U.S. Cuba's a lot closer to the U.S. than Taiwan is to China, but yet it's our backyard. We exist fine without controlling Cuba. What's the difference?
This is really, really key. And this is why, in many ways, I wrote this book, is to highlight to the American public the importance of Taiwan and how Taiwan has been actually critical to U.S. strategic interests for many, many decades. In fact, in 1950, right, 75, almost 75 years ago, General Douglas MacArthur called Formosa, as Taiwan was called at the time, the unsinkable aircraft carrier because of its critical importance strategically to the East Asia region and to containing China. So when China looks out at the world, it actually sees itself in a very bad geopolitical position, right? It feels that it's completely contained by U.S. allies and U.S. military bases. You know, from South Korea to its very east, the peninsula that hosts 28,000 American troops in South Korea, radar installations, Air Force bases, to the Japanese islands, where we have the headquarters of the 7th Fleet of the U.S. Navy. We have Marines in Okinawa. The Japanese forces themselves are highly capable. And then at the very center of that first island chain, facing many of the Chinese ports and much of its economic output, is Taiwan, viewed as an outpost of American power, even though we have very few troops there today. And then closing out the arc, the Philippines, where once again, United States military is getting access to the Filipino military bases. So if you're China, right, and it's important to put yourself in the position of your adversary to think like they think, and to not just assume that they always have only nefarious reasons to do what they do, but both defensive and offensive considerations play a big role into the decision making of people like Xi and people like Putin. And right now, they feel very insecure. And in particular, when China itself believes, and Xi believes, that they have the right to be the world's preeminent superpower, in part because of history, because throughout human civilization, China was the world's most powerful country, most populous country, the richest country. And it is only in the last few hundred years, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, that they lost that preeminent position, first to Europe and now the United States. Well, guess what? She's saying that he is embarking on this mission of Chinese national rejuvenation. And part of it, of course, is reemergence on the world stage as not just a peer competitor to the United States, but someone who ultimately wants to eclipse the United States, and certainly do so in East Asia and kick the United States out. They're very, very open about that. Well, you can't do that without controlling Taiwan, without escaping from this containment that they currently have. And geography matters a great deal here. The problem that China has is that the depth of the waters around its shores, both in South China Sea and then in the East China Sea, is very, very shallow. About 300 feet is the average depth of the waters in the Taiwan Strait. This is too shallow to even put submarines in without being easily detected. And naval power projection, of course, is essential to securing global trade routes, which are mostly maritime trade routes. If you look at the history of the growth of the U.S. power over the last century, it really begins with the buildup of the U.S. Navy in the 1890s and early 1900s, and really was symbolized by the Great White Fleet that Teddy Roosevelt sent around the world in 1907, that visited Japan, went through the Panama Canal, and really highlighted to the world that America has arrived. And ever since then, the United States Navy has protected the world trade routes for U.S. exports, for U.S. consumers, and it really coincided with our economic rise, which obviously underpinned our national security and military power. Well, China wants to duplicate that. It is building blue water navy that allows it to traverse the world's oceans. It has invested massively in shipbuilding capacity. It has about 200 times shipbuilding capacity that of the United States now. But none of that matters if it can't escape that containment, if it can't get out to those oceans, the Pacific Ocean in particular, And right now, to do so, it needs to go through these choke points between Taiwan and the Philippines, or Taiwan and Japan, and some of the others in South China Sea, which are effectively controlled by U.S. Navy, right? That can blockade China if it wants to, blockade imports of vital goods like fuel in particular. And China still imports lots of fuel from the Middle East, fossil fuels, and of course exports. The Chinese economy is highly dependent on that. So if you want to be the world's preeminent superpower, or even an equal power to the United States, you can't allow your primary rival to continue that way. And Taiwan is essential to that breaking out of that containment, because the waters on the other side of Taiwan, on their eastern side, are very deep, about 12,000 feet. So if you own Taiwan, you can put submarine bases there, you can put surface ship bases there, radar installations, and really dominate that region and push the United States out from the Philippines, from Japan, where its ongoing presence there would be really unsustainable and quite dangerous, all the way out to Hawaii and dominate East Asia, and try to expand that to all of Asia ultimately. And when I say dominate, I don't mean go on the sort of Hitlerian conquest of Asia and invade Japan or Philippines, but just be the biggest power in the region and use that power to bully other nations around, to set the rules for trade order, for security order, and ultimately use that as a power projection capability, as a springboard for advancing your interests around the world. So if you want to prevent China from becoming the world's greatest power and challenging the United States, which, by the way, anytime that has happened throughout history has, in lots of cases, led to conflict. So you really want to keep them contained within that first island chain, within the South China Sea, and have that leverage over them to prevent them from becoming the world's greatest power.
So to deter them from moving on Taiwan is to not decouple, but to actually remain codependent to some extent, which I understand. And I tend to be more in the decouple camp personally, from a perspective of resilience. And a lot of that comes more from the experience that we had with COVID, where our supply chains completely collapsed, and wanting to avoid that again. But you make a great counterpoint, which is the more we need each other, the more they need us, the less likely they are going to take actions. But they have a vote. And so my question to you is, does China want to decouple? Even if we don't, do they?
Yeah. So this is not about decoupling. Decoupling is counterproductive. First of all, it's impossible, right? Fully decouple. China is the world's second largest economy. Even if we somehow manage to decouple from it, which would be almost unimaginable, the rest of the world won't follow us over that cliff. So it is impossible to get disconnected from them. But two, it's counterproductive because if you fully decouple, you have no leverage over them, which is ultimately what you want to deter an invasion of Taiwan. But what you need to do is, and I call this in the book, unidirectional entanglement. You want sort of one-way decoupling, where we become less dependent on them for resiliency, national security, enhanced deterrence, but they become more dependent on us, right, in the areas of advanced technology, semiconductors, and so forth. So that sort of asymmetric decoupling, or coupling in the other direction, is really what we want to achieve. So I suspect that we're actually a lot closer in our positions there than you might think. And by the way, this is China's strategy and has been for decades, right? Xi's Made in China 2025 plan is all about that, achieving self-reliance in critical areas like semiconductors, aerospace, biotech, and the like, while at the same time making the rest of the world more dependent on them and becoming a hub for advanced manufacturing in all of these critical technologies. We need to invert that, and we need to adopt that strategy ourselves. Not that we want to build everything in the United States. I don't think that's viable given our cost of labor and permitting issues and environmental standards and the like, but working with allies to friendshore a lot of these capabilities and make China more reliant on us by leveraging smartly export controls and sanctions and something called the Foreign Direct Product Rule, a very powerful tool in the U.S. Commerce Department to basically regulate export of any technology made anywhere in the world as long as it contains U.S. intellectual property, to really contain China's ambitions in those critical industries and critical components that you need to manufacture advanced technologies.
I'm not going to give away the plot of the book, but I just want to show it to you because it was such a great read. If you're interested in policy in this world, this is a must-read book. But one of your solutions that you lay out is to enable innovation in this country. I couldn't agree with you more. I think historically, that's what made this country great, is a history of innovation and excellence. It's our fault if we lose it, if we lose that competitive advantage. And yet I feel like we might be getting close to shooting ourselves in our own foot. Could you walk us through maybe just even a few of the areas that you see as critical innovation areas that we need to not just maintain, but grow?
Yeah, I believe we need to win this race for the 21st century, which goes beyond just deterring an invasion of Taiwan, but really winning what I call Cold War II with China that I believe we're fully engaged in. That is very similar to the first Cold War. You need to win the technological race first and foremost, and particularly the race in four essential technologies that I think will define economic progress, economic growth in the second part of this century. And those technologies are artificial intelligence and autonomy. And anyone that's been paying attention to the space and looked and played around with things like ChatGPT and Claude and others probably is getting the feel for where this is going, and probably even underestimates where the great potential of this capability, particularly when you marry it with real world effects that you can have in the space of robotics and automation and so forth. Really, really key. Good news is that we're leading that space, and not just leading, but actually managing to curtail China's ambitions, right? If you look at the top 5 companies in the space today, they're OpenAI / Microsoft, Google, Anthropic, and Meta and xAI. And it's not an accident that all of them are American, and it's not an accident that China has really no advanced foundation models that compete with them, because we've been able to curtail their import of advanced semiconductors, NVIDIA GPUs, and AMD GPUs and the like to train and run these sophisticated models. And compute is essential to AI, right? You can get data, you can get talent. Talent exists in lots of places, but if you can't get compute at sufficient quantities, you're not going to be able to train those models. And despite their attempts to purchase these GPUs on the black market, they've not been able to do it at scale that is necessary to produce these models, and they're falling further and further behind as we advance. Second area is biotech and synthetic biology, and not just in the area where most people tend to jump to when they hear those words of medicine. And I think medicine will be revolutionized in the coming decades with these advancements in biotech, but just as importantly, in the area of bioenergetics, being able to create new energy sources basically in the lab using synthetic biology, or biomanufacturing, being able to create new materials, more durable materials, more efficient materials, being able to create things like concrete or replacements for concrete and cement in the lab in a much more carbon efficient and energy efficient way. Incredible potential there in the coming decades, right? If we can unlock that. We're leading there, not just in the research area, but also because I believe that those areas will be highly reliant on advancements in AI. And if you can win the AI battle, I think it will transfer to winning in biotech. The third area is space, and particularly the advancements we've seen in the last couple of decades with the emergence of reusable lift in terms of reusable rockets, and the miniaturization of the satellites that we're setting up there. Instead of sending these school bus satellites that would cost $1 billion to develop, we're now sending CubeSats and satellites a little bit larger that are much, much cheaper to build, can be sent in high numbers, and create these constellations in low Earth orbit that are revolutionizing communications, like Starlink has done, navigation, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for military purposes, and lots of other purposes like agricultural innovations and the like. And not only are we leading that space, but we have an advantage of time because the space in space is actually quite limited. and with Starlink sending up so many of these satellites and Starshield, a related program for the U.S. military, as well as Amazon's Kuiper constellation that is going up shortly. If China doesn't get their act together and start sending their own constellations up, they won't have any space to put them up in because of interference issues with regards to satellites and communications. So we've got a lead. It's not insurmountable, but we've got a lead right now. China's been focused on developing their own reusable rockets. Had a major setback just a couple of weeks ago when they were doing a static fire of their semi-reusable rocket engine, and it managed to lift off, something that hasn't happened in rocket design since the 1950s, and tells you about how things may be with regards to safety and progress of their space program overall. And then the last area is green energy. And there we're losing badly, right? So China is dominating batteries, nuclear, wind, solar, in large part because they've engaged in massive amounts of intellectual property theft over the last couple of decades, massive subsidization by their government, as well as overcapacity to drive prices down and really drive everyone else out of business, which they managed to accomplish to a great extent over the last couple of decades. It's not that we don't have the innovation in the space. You look at some of the things coming out of Silicon Valley, some really incredible research into advanced battery designs, for example, on nuclear space. Modular nuclear reactors are really, really interesting. But if we can't level the playing field and reduce the impact of China's subsidization of those industries, they can't compete, right? So tariff policy is really essential. The administration just announced some tariffs on China's critical minerals industry, as well as batteries, EVs, and related sectors. Really, really important. Potentially, we need to look at raising those tariffs even higher, letting them go into place sooner to make sure that our own industry can compete. We need to encourage our allies to do the same. And then in addition to those four technology areas, you have two critical components that you need to build those technologies. And those are semiconductors and critical minerals. And on critical minerals, we're also losing badly, not just because China is dominating the mining sector in particular. They've been able to buy up mining rights around the world. But even more importantly, they've been able to establish complete dominance around processing and refining of those minerals, where depending on the mineral, up to 90% of that processing and refining now happens in China. We need to invest in friendshoring that production and subsidizing it and leveling the playing field again with China. And now in semiconductors, it's a mixed bag. We're leading in advance, and China is leading in what I call foundational chips, which are also really, really critical, and we need to correct that as well.
To go back to a prior comment where you said we're probably not as far apart as we may sound when it comes to decoupling, I agree. I mean, something like critical minerals, both mining and processing. I'm actually really excited about that as an investment opportunity, because I feel like we have to get this right. I mean, we have to friendshore or reshore that type of production to be resilient and to be strong. But I want to pivot to what you're seeing driving this timeline, because you mentioned a couple of things in the book. One, that China isn't that strong. Maybe not as strong as they appear. And we've gotten recent data out of China to indicate that there are some serious challenges facing their economy. And you also have the parallels that you draw in the book between Vladimir Putin and Xi, two aging leaders that are committed to making their stamp on history in their countries and running out of time. So could you talk a little bit to sort of what you see driving Xi's push for Taiwan?
Yeah, so I was one of the first geopolitical analysts to have predicted that Putin was going to invade Ukraine later that winter. I did so in kind of mid-December 2021.
If I may just interrupt 1 second to say, I've had lots of geopolitical analysts on this show over the years. George Friedman, Jacob Shapiro, people who are friends, who got it wrong, completely wrong. And you were one of the few early on to lay out methodically, here's what I see happening, here's how it stacks up against history. He is going to invade. So hats off to you.
I gave a timeline. I said before the end of the war, which came close, February 24th, but he ultimately did. Unfortunately, I wish I had been wrong. And I sat down to start writing this book, World on the Brink, right after that invasion, because the causes of that conflict, what I believe drove Putin to invade Ukraine, I believe are fully transferable to the Indo-Pacific. It is um, remarkable how similar the two situations really are. And I believe there are 5 reasons why Putin launched this ruinous war. And I think those same 5 reasons are driving Xi to want to invade Taiwan. Um, First and foremost, as you rightly mentioned, both men are in their 70s, early 70s. So they're looking at the twilight of their careers, right? Potentially last decade of their hold'em power thereabouts. And ego drives both men clearly. They're not just focused on, making their countries great again, to borrow a phrase, but they're really focused on being the people that get credit, go down to the pantheon of the histories of their respective countries as the ones that enlarged it and secured it and made them more powerful. In Putin's mind, he is the new Peter the Great, also someone that has a deep connection to St. Petersburg, where Putin was born. Of course, Peter the Great founded the city. And he talks often about his admiration for him and how he expanded the Russian Empire. Xi, I believe, wants to go into the history books as someone who's greater than Mao, that achieved something that Mao could never do, which is take Taiwan and achieve this great rejuvenation, as he calls it, of the Chinese nation. I also believe that history and destiny play a big role with the two men, in particular their distorted view of history. Putin, of course, has written and talked frequently about how he doesn't believe Ukraine is a nation and has always belonged to Russia, while the exact same words are coming out of Xi's mouth and the Chinese Communist Party that Taiwan is not a nation and belongs to China, even though history proves them both wrong on that point. And they believe that it is their country's destiny and their personal destiny, I believe, to rectify these mistakes and in their view and take these territories. And then security and geography play a role as well. I'm not one of those people, like John Mearsheimer, that believes that NATO expansion is the only reason why Putin invaded Ukraine. I think that's quite easily debunked. But I also don't believe the other side of the argument that says it had absolutely nothing to do with it. And I think the strongest argument to actually make that NATO expansion did have a role in him driving this conflict in Ukraine is because if Ukraine joins NATO, it removes his optionality to invade Ukraine and dominate it, as he clearly wants to do. So just on that basis alone, I think from an offensive perspective, he cared about NATO expansion to Ukraine and Ukraine becoming more and more entangled with NATO. And there were security reasons as well. He didn't want to see NATO entrenchment so close to Russia's borders. But he also, wanted to dominate Ukraine, and NATO would have prevented him from doing so. And similarly with Xi, we talked about the geography of Taiwan and how critical it is. He is keenly aware of that, both from a defensive perspective and from an offensive perspective, in terms of wanting to dominate East Asia, push the United States out, Taiwan is really, really critical to them. So very, very similar motives and the way both men think, I think. The timeline is different. I'm not predicting that, this invasion is about to happen. This would be very, very difficult, right? Putin has seen how difficult it is to invade Ukraine, a land war where he could easily flow forces across the border. This would be an amphibious invasion on a scale hereto unimaginable. Just to give you a quick sense of how difficult this might be. So last month, we celebrated, of course, the 80th anniversary of the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day, where almost 160,000 Allied troops crossed the English Channel to land in Normandy. But what most people don't know is that as that operation was underway, the planners at the Joint Staff in the United States military were planning another amphibious invasion, which was going to be twice as large. And that was the invasion of Formosa, as Taiwan was called at the time, Operation Causeway, the plans for which were finalized in August of 1944. It called for over 300,000 troops to land on the island of Formosa, fight for several months against entrenched Japanese forces on that island. And ultimately, Roosevelt, MacArthur, and others looked at this and said, this is too hard. This is really, really difficult. The casualties here are unacceptable. And we're going to bypass Taiwan and invade Okinawa. So even back then, 80 years ago, 1944, this was very difficult, right? Everything that's happened since then in the military innovation space has made defense even more powerful and made this much, much harder. Right, not to mention that the forces that the Taiwanese and potentially the Americans would field are much greater than what the Japanese were able to do in 1944-45. So very, very challenging to pull off. He knows it. He knows he's not ready yet. He's given an order for the PLA to be ready by 2027. Doesn't mean that he will invade then or even that the PLA will fulfill that order. Because as we know, government agencies, regardless of country, just because you tell them to do something by a certain date, doesn't mean that they actually follow through on that. But I think the intent is clearly there. The buildup that they're undertaking is done with basically one purpose and one purpose only, to accomplish this. So I do think he wants to do it in his lifetime while he is still in power. And that window may close effectively in 2032 when he's going to be up for another reelection. He'll be 79 at that point. In the Chinese system, traditionally, they've not elected their leaders in their 80s. And perhaps something that the Americans can learn from. The one thing, potentially.
Perhaps.
And I say election, of course, it's the election of the Communist Party, not the election of the broader Chinese population. It's not a democracy. But nevertheless, there is an actual election that does take place within the Congress, Chinese Party Congress, that he needs to win. So, he's looking at, 2032, early 2030s as potential end date for him, his rule over the party, and wanting to take credit for this. But also in the 2030s, you really start to see the dynamics change in the region, where a lot of the investments that we are now making, the Taiwanese are making, the Japanese are making, will start to come online in the mid-2030s, early 2040s. So the longer they wait, the worse it gets for them. So this is the window if you're going to do it, which is why I'm so concerned about it.
And as you and many others have pointed out, those two individuals, Putin and Xi, have a history of saying what they're going to do and then doing it. And Xi has said point blank he is going to reunify, in his words, reunify the island with China.
That's right. And look, maybe I'm wrong, right? I'm not, so self-confident that I think I always get it right. And, predictions are always difficult, as Niels Bohr said, especially about the future. So we have to have some self-doubt around this. But where I come at this, and there are people on the other side that believe that this is unlikely to happen because of the difficulties, because of the impact to the Chinese economy, and he'll never do it. But look, even if there's a 5% chance that I'm right, the stakes are so high here, so critical for the United States security, obviously for the region, that I believe that we have to do whatever it takes to deter it. And the cost of that deterrence is way, way lower than the downsides if you miscalculate and make the assumption that he'll never do it and then be proven wrong, as we have been in Ukraine, right, with Putin. So that's why we have to make this a key priority for the United States, not to decouple, but to de-risk, to engage in this unidirectional entanglement that I'm talking about, to make China more reliant on us, and then obviously from a military perspective to really double down on the hard power deterrence.
Dmitry, a little bit of a curveball question here. You mentioned the importance of chips, innovation, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, arguably one of the most important companies in the world, and manufacturer of massive amounts of highly sophisticated chips. How does quantum fit into this? Because when, and it's a big question as to when it happens, but quantum in theory could make chips, at least for many applications, obsolete, which could be a game changer. So it seems like the first country and company to get quantum right changes everything. I'm curious, just in general, what your thoughts are on quantum and if it plays any role here.
Yeah, I don't believe so. You notice in my listing of 4 critical technologies, quantum is not in there. It's not in there on purpose because I don't actually believe quantum is important. In fact, the main application for quantum is breaking some traditional cryptography. So if you are the NSA, you care a lot about quantum. It's not clear to me why anyone else should care about quantum, because most of the computing applications we have today, like AI, for example, and many others, would not be accelerated at all by quantum. So there are some very specialized problems that quantum is uniquely designed to solve, but they're actually very, very few in number, despite the fact that we have decades of academic research into the development of quantum algorithms that would be faster on a quantum computer than a traditional computer. We haven't come up with almost any. Basically, cryptography is the main one, with Shor's algorithm that was invented in 1994, by the way. So just to give you a sense of how long, almost 30 years, we've been focused on this, actually exactly 30 years. And yet we haven't come up with many others. There are a few minor ones in kind of radar and sensing capabilities, which are important for the military, but would not be significantly important for the rest of the economy. And I liken this to the development of the traditional computers, right? Long before we actually had a computer, we had developed an entire theory of computing by Alan Turing and many others, so that when those computers arrived, we had all those algorithms ready to go and really accelerate the developments for military purposes, scientific purposes, business purposes, etc. You haven't had that in quantum. Maybe it will come, but for now, I don't think it's that important, and I don't think it will actually change much of anything.
Before you leave, I want to invite you to join my Global Macro Update newsletter. This is a free service that comes out every Tuesday and Friday. I'll send you an email with my latest thoughts on geopolitics, economics, the markets, along with a link to the latest interview and a transcript. If you'd like to join us, hit the link in the description below or go to globalmacroupdate.com and join over 100,000 other Global Macro Update readers. I hope you join us. I'm Ed D'Agostino. Thanks for watching.